Welcome to Wines We Drink, a podcast for wine lovers and learners. I'm Charlotte Norsworthy, and together with my counterpart Keith Herndon, we'll be exploring a new wine each week. Keith is a lover of wine, and I am a learner of wine. We hope you'll learn and sip along with us too. Hello to all of our listeners. Welcome back to Wines We Drink, the podcast where we talk about wine, drink some wine, and talk about it some more. I'm here today with my co-host Keith Herndon, as always, and we are ready to talk about and drink some wine today.
Charlotte, yes, we are ready for a wonderful episode today. I'm a relative newcomer as a fan of the wine we're going to be drinking today, and I'm excited to share my discovery with our listeners.
Finally, you're more similar to my shoes this week. Well, last week we enjoyed a delicious bottle of California Merlot that just so happened to be a wonderful suggestion from my father. So if you missed that episode, you'll find it along with all of our other episodes wherever you get your podcasts. So I understand that we're remaining in the red category this week. Keith, what are we drinking today?
Well, after that wonderful Merlot that your father suggested last week, the 2018 Robert Mondavi Merlot that was aged in rum barrels, I knew I had to come back with a strong and equally impressive selection, but also a value selection. And for awesome value and some very robust red wines, I suggest our listeners explore the Spain's Rioja region. And I've selected one of that region's impressive wines made from the Tempranillo grape.
Oh, well, so far through our episodes, we've been to California, Oregon, New Mexico, south of France, Italy, and South Africa. I may have missed a place in that list, but I'm sure this is the first time we've tried a wine from Spain.
Yes, Spain has such a strong history in wine and a wonderful culture that's built up around their unique wine offerings, but there is no place more steeped in the Spanish tradition of wine than in Rioja. At the suggestion of a friend about 3 years ago, I started trying Tempranillo from a variety of the Rioja wineries, and I was hooked. I became so obsessed with this varietal that as part of this past year of wine training, I completed a diploma through the Rioja Wine Academy's online course. For any of you listening who may be interested in such a course, it's free, and you'll find a link to it on the resources page at wineswedrink.com. The course is excellent, but I'll warn you in advance, study hard for the exam. It's timed and quite challenging.
Oh man, gotta break out the flashcards for that one. An entire diploma course around one Spanish region. Yeah, that kind of does sound like an obsession.
Yes, but it's a wonderful region to study, and now that the pandemic is easing, I'm looking forward to adding it to my future travel itinerary. Rioja is in northern Spain, a little more than 200 miles north of Madrid. There are mountains to the north and south of Rioja, and the Ebro River flows through it, and the climate and soils with a good blend of silt and sand and clay are just ideal for viticulture.
Wow, well, that sounds wonderful. So Tempranillo, that's the grape variety associated with Rioja.
Yes, there are some other grape varieties grown there, but more than 75% of the area under viticulture in Rioja is growing Tempranillo. When someone says Chablis, we understand that the French region is about Chardonnay. It's the same here. When someone talks about Rioja, we associate that with Tempranillo.
Wow, well, that's interesting background about the region, but what are the specific characteristics of the Tempranillo grape?
Well, the Tempranillo is a derivative of the Spanish word temprano, which means early. And it got this name because it tends to ripen a few weeks earlier than most other red grape varieties in Southern Europe. So I guess we can say it just wants to get a head start on becoming a delicious wine. As I started drinking this wine and learning more about it, I came across some descriptions from the famous wine writer Jancis Robinson that I particularly liked. She called these wines essentially savory, but added there is something sappy, fresh, and vegetal about it. And to me, that just kind of sums it up. These wines have high tannins like a Cabernet Sauvignon, but they just strike me as fresher, even though they spend time in oak barrels.
All right, well, let's get into the details of the specific bottle we're drinking today. Please tell our audience about the specific bottle we're opening.
Yes, we're opening a 2014 Rioja Reserva from the Marqués de Riscal winery. This winery is incredibly popular on the Vivino wine app, and this particular 2014 varietal has more than 24,000 ratings out there already, and it comes in as one of the top 2% of wines in the world on that app's rating system.
Wow, I mean, you have not stopped all summer with these highly rated wines, and I'm learning to never look at the supermarket wine shelves the way I used to.
Well, there's so many great choices when it comes to Rioja Tempranillo, but I chose this particular bottle not only because of its rating, but also the reputation of this winery. This particular company exports to more than 110 countries. And through my exploration and trying some of these different Tempranillos, I found that this winery always delivers quality.
Wow, well, I'm ready. So please proceed with filling a couple of glasses for us.
Yes, I've already had this in a decanter. This bottle from 2014 and coming out of some oak barrels before it went into this bottle. I think it needed some time to unwind and think about its life outside of the bottle, if you will. So I'm pouring these two. It's a really nice, deep purple color. I would kind of describe it as almost a maroon shade of purple.
Yeah, the bubbles even have a sort of more brown tendency to them. And you mentioned, this is a 2014. This, is a rather old, wine compared to the other wines we've drank so far in this series.
Yeah, but not for Tempranillo, not really.
Really?
This is a quite this wine would age for many more years, in the bottle.
Interesting.
Like that. So, how do you think that this color compares to the Merlot that we drank last week?
Very similar to the Merlot in its opaqueness. I mean, you cannot see through this wine. I mean, it is, if you flash your hand on the other side of the glass, you lose it in the wine.
Right. So, as always, I'm going to ask you to swirl and smell. And what are some of the aromas that you're getting there?
Wow, it's quite a bold, and again, similar to the darker reds that we've had. It's a nice bold smell.
Bold is a quite apt way of describing this wine. Some of the official tasting notes that I read describe the aromas as intense.
Intense, yeah. I mean, that's accurate. It definitely, I could feel it rimming my nostrils. It lingers for a while, and it lets you marinate on it.
Okay, so go ahead and have your first taste.
Okay. Oh, wow. Oh, yeah, that is very interesting and quite distinct from the Merlot that we had. In a lot of ways, first, the tannins. It definitely feels more tannic. And the drying sensation is rather immediate, but again, it doesn't stay for an uncomfortable length of time. I'm going to go in for a second taste so that I can grab some of these flavors here.
What would be something that would come to mind at the front of the palate here? What are some of the things that you're beginning to taste?
Yeah, I mean, I'm getting a large presence right at the beginning of kind of what you were describing earlier or quoting earlier as like a vegetal taste here. It definitely feels, I don't want to say too oaky, but I do get a lot of the sort of wood, bark, earthy sensations right at the beginning. But then at the very end, I'm almost getting some spices there at the very end. It only lingers for maybe 2 seconds, so I can't necessarily place it, but it's definitely there.
Yeah, I definitely feel that this is an aged wine that has spent some time in the oak barrels, and it's definitely got that oak presence to it. I don't believe it's overpoweringly oaky. I think that tends to give it some more vanilla undertones, if you will. But you did mention the word earthy there, and that's definitely a characteristic of this wine. I think there are some almost smoke in this wine. I mean, it's a very deep smoky wine. Have another taste and see if you can identify maybe some of the spices that you get at the finish.
I'm getting warmth. So I don't know if it's a cinnamon or a nutmeg or a cardamom or something like that. I mean, it's very warm feeling.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely some hints of cinnamon in this. I like that you mentioned cardamom and things. One of the tasting notes that I mentioned that I read referred to licorice.
Oh yeah,
as kind of some of that. Some people might not like a licorice, but when you put it in this context, it's not overpowering. It's not bitter at all.
No, and it's not the first flavor. I think licorice, if you think about a strap of licorice that you eat as candy, that flavor hits you from the beginning, middle, and end.
Right.
But this licorice, it's very understated.
Right. And then when we start talking about, the earth and the oak and stuff, I don't want our listeners to come away thinking that there's not any fruit forwardness or fruit flavors in this. I mean, you definitely get some really interesting, dark fruit notes in here. I consider this to be a very plummy wine. It's almost like you took plums instead of grapes and made this wine and then put it in oak barrels.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely describes the taste that's left in your mouth. So once you've taken a sip and, I'm sort of sitting here not sipping and just relaxing with the taste on my tongue, plum is the perfect way to describe that sort of fruitiness that's left over. And, one thing I think that's interesting about this wine, too, is texture, I guess would be the way to describe this. It feels thicker. You know what I mean? It doesn't feel, like if you were to compare this to some of the white wines that we drink, some of the summer sippers, as we like to call them, this one feels more full-bodied on the mouth. Absolutely.
I think our audience should understand that this is a really full-bodied red wine. It's spent some time in oak barrels, so we've talked about its oaky notes. But again, oak isn't the full story here. I think this wine holds on to its fruit heritage. I mentioned plum. I think there is some definite hints of blackberry there. There's some cherry flavors. And then I just like the fact that this wine has some sassiness to it. When I think of Spain, I think of a certain type of culture, and that type of culture and just the sassiness, that you can get from something like that, with the hints of cinnamon that you mentioned, and I think there's even some black pepper, coming forward. But it's really that intense concentration of a lot of different flavors, and the more you drink this, the more these different flavors come forward, and you get to taste a real smorgasbord, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely vibrant. It's not a quiet wine. That's for sure. And sassiness, I mean, I love that. And that's a really good way to describe sort of how all of these flavors come together. It's in such a fantastic, firework, if you will. So this is a bold and it's a tannic wine. But is it going to take a big bite out of my wallet, too?
Not at all. As I mentioned, I was really on the quest to find another value wine. And just as the Merlot that we drank last week, this bottle is recognized by Vivino as an exceptional value wine. The average price on the app is around $20. But I found some online at under $15. Vivino said that this wines of similar quality and rating usually cost about twice as much.
Oh, wow. Okay, so we're rooting out some deals here these past 2 weeks. Great wines at great prices. I love it.
Yeah. So although, we've described this as a big bowl red wine, its alcohol by volume is at 14%. So it's not going to be too heavy. But like all of these red wines that spend time in oak, this wine is going to pair well with, all kinds of red meats. But I don't think this is a one-trick wine. There are enough flavor varieties in this wine to make it more versatile, in my opinion, than a Cabernet Sauvignon. I think this would go nicely with roasted duck without overpowering it.
Yeah, wow, that sounds yummy. But is this something that a non-meat eater can also adapt to?
Yeah, I think this is a great wine to pair, with grilled vegetable. Put them on the skewers. Especially if you put some mild red peppers on there. And I think that a vegetable skewer with some of these pepper combinations would work really well with some of the spicy characteristics of notes of this wine. And for cheese lovers, open this bottle and pair it with some Manchego, and you have wine cheese perfection.
Wow, you always know how to get me with the cheese pairings. Tempranillo and Manchego. I am writing that one down.
As I'm taking down my notes here, we're going to take a short break, but stick around, and we'll be back to wrap up this episode shortly with our weekly wine word feature.
This week's word is reserva. Welcome back to today's episode. Our wine word this week is reserva. That word appears on the label of today's bottle, so what does it mean?
Charlotte, Spain's wine regulators, and especially those in Rioja, take the quality and description of their wines very seriously. So the descriptors on the label have regulatory meanings. In the case of the word reserva appearing on the bottle of a Tempranillo from Rioja, that means it has been aged for a minimum of 3 years, with at least one of those years in the cask. So when you see the word Gran in front of a Reserva, that means it's a Rioja Tempranillo labeled as Gran Reserva. It's spent at least 2 years aging in the oak cask and 3 years in the bottle. Some countries put legal meanings behind the word, like Reserva, right? Italy, for example, has rules on how you can label something Reserva, spelled with an I, R-I-S-E-R-V-A. But be careful when you see the word reserve on labels from wines made in the U.S., New Zealand, and Australia, for example, because there is no legal meaning in those countries, and wineries can use the word reserve however they want. Now, most use it appropriately to indicate a higher quality wine or something that they want to highlight from their winery, but there is some wineries that just use that word for pure marketing purposes. So you have to understand that the English version of reserve on our wines doesn't carry the same regulatory meaning that the word reserva or Gran Reserva means when you get it from a Spanish wine.
Man, that's some more insight into those pesky wine labels. It's some trickery happening, potentially.
Yes, as we said last week, the wine industry doesn't make it easy for us to shop for wines, and it gets even more confusing when we begin to understand the use of a word on a wine label from one country might not mean the same or have the same regulatory control when it's used on the label of a wine from another country.
Whew. Well, thanks again, Keith. Next week, we're leaving the wine kitchen, and we are going on location to drink wines with a local chef, though I wish we were going to Rioja, Spain. I think we'll have a lot of fun.
I'm so looking forward to talking with our friend Jessica Rothacker from the Heirloom Cafe about the wine she serves at her restaurant and how she kind of sorts through all of the choices that she uses to put together a wine list.
Oh yeah, it's going to be a fascinating conversation, but I'm most interested in finding out what she's selected for us to drink.
Yes, and I'm sure it's going to be remarkably good.
Oh yeah. Well, that brings us to a close for this week's episode. Looking forward to being with you next week at the Heirloom Cafe. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Charlotte.
Thanks for listening to Wines We Drink. Listen to our other episodes anywhere you get your podcasts. And follow us on Twitter at Wines We Drink and Instagram at The Wines We Drink. Cheers.